There are many occasions where I had to animate scenes where I'm like, how the hell am I even going to approach this? How am I going to do this? Whether it's a long take with complex acting, a fight sequence, a transformation scene, or a scene where there's so many things happening at once, there's no doubt I get intimidated before I even start. However, with the proper approach and toolset, this isn't nearly as complicated as it looks. Hey guys, it's Toniko Pantoja, and today I'd like to talk about how you can approach animation shots, sometimes detailed, complicated shots, without feeling way too overwhelmed or intimidated. Every time I animate, I think about 4 crucial things that I constantly have to remind myself to be less intimidated. The first one is planning, basically creating a roadmap for myself before I start animation or before I start the work. Then there's the idea of being confident and fearless, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm making the right choices all the time and I'm making good work all the time. I'm allowing myself to make mistakes. I'm allowing myself to make crude drawings. The third crucial element is patience. I know that there's going to be multiple steps and passes. I know I'm probably going to have to redo a lot of my animation work, acknowledging that there are better acting choices, drawing choices, whatever that is. And the fourth one I want to bring up is priority. What's the important element and what's just distraction? Therefore, when I start, I immediately start with that first, and then everything else that's not super important, I can just add later on. So for example, my main priority is a guy swinging a sword. That's the action, that's the main primary action. And then everything that's like secondary to me is like how good the drawing looks, effects. As long as I have the primary animation down, or the essential idea of it, everything else is icing on the cake. The first one I want to talk about is planning. How do I plan my animation? What does that even mean? So we all know that drawing plays a huge role in hand-drawn animation. And if you have good drawing skills that can read emotion, the acting choices are all there, and it's all very specific, it's not generic but specific, that makes the animation much stronger. So one of the things that helped me in both having decisive drawings and animation is the practice of thumbnailing. In this case, thumbnailing is the idea of making these super loose and small drawings before committing to the final product or whatever that is. Something that a lot of beginning animators or artists don't really do is explore their thoughts and to experiment with those ideas and to just figure that stuff out. You know, when I approach a scene, I have a lot of different ideas and how to approach it or how to tackle it, but I normally won't know until I see a visual image of it. So let's say it's a specific scene where the character is super angry and sad all the time. There's just so many ways I can do that. So I would thumbnail ideas that I have in my head. I would just draw out very rough versions of poses and experiment with the same idea with different alternatives. Maybe the shoulder language is different. Maybe the acting choice is different. And there's endless ways to show different emotions like happiness, sadness, anger, and surprise. But I want to find one that best represents the scene. Sometimes I would also write notes, reminding myself at this time the character will raise their fist, or at this line of dialogue the character will pose this way. And if you have another idea, just thumbnail that out and see what that looks like. Sometimes I have many drawings that represent one word in the dialogue. Because I just had so many different ideas for it, I won't know until I can see them all visually and start selecting the ones that best represents the thing that I want. But the great thing is that I didn't really commit to any one of those at the moment. I was just playing around and experimenting, doodling. It's kind of like I'm just journaling my thoughts down and then just seeing it on paper. And what's beneficial about this practice is that it does help improve your experimentation skills, your critical thinking skills, exploration, until you find drawings that are more unique and specific, and that best represent the idea that you want. Also, because I've thumbnailed a lot and I forced myself to think before I animated, I got better in visualizing things in my head. And so I don't really thumbnail as much if I feel more confident about the scene. I know exactly what I already want. But if I really wanted to finesse the drawings and the acting and performance, for example, I would resort to thumbnailing. Here's another idea of how I plan. So let's say my character moves around the stage. Maybe that character is jumping around, fighting around the scene, dancing around the scene. Sometimes I'll just make one drawing that has multiple poses of the same character laid out through the scene. So for example, when I teach animation, I highly encourage my students to draw something like the bouncing ball in just one drawing, where you see all the frames in just one single drawing. So that way they can plan their arcs, their spacing, where the ball should be. And on another layer where they actually do the animation, they can use that as a placeholder or reference and a guide for when they animate. Now we're ready to start animating. So you've probably seen process videos of animators who are excellent draftsmen. Their drawing skills are superb and their animation skills are also just as superb. So when they draw, it's already super clean, it's already detailed. The drawings already look nice on their first pass. It's not sketchy, messy, or indecisive. The drawings are pretty clean, right? If you're a beginning animator, I would ignore that for now, and I would rather focus on just animating the feeling or the abstract shape of it rather than how the drawing looks. There's a wonderful animator named Mike Nguyen. He has a website called rainplace.net, and it's an underrated resource by an underrated yet highly talented animator. He's been in the industry for many years. He's worked on Iron Giant, and not only does he have a strong passion for hand-drawn animation, but he's also very practical and talks about things like how he ties down his drawings, how he uses charts, how he organizes his frames. But one thing that's really special about his stuff is that when he shows references along with his animation, sometimes his reference is just a video of his hand. He just used the timing of his hand, the movement of his hand to represent the galloping of a deer, for example. And he was really doing it to capture the movement and to capture the overall feeling. So this gave me a great idea in how to prioritize things. Prioritizing the idea of the animation more so than how nice the drawing looks. So here's an animation of some dude in a skirt whipping towards the foreground. But I didn't start by breaking down the anatomy, the construction, or the figure of this character. I borrowed Mike Nguyen's sensibility about animating the feeling by just drawing a blob with a head. This represents the overall staging, the energy, and the timing for our character. Me thinking about the technical stuff like where the feet are planted, the posture of the character, where the hands are. I can figure that later on in another pass where I animate on top of my abstract blob. So with a new pass and a new layer, I started just drawing the character design fitting in those blobs. If you want, this is where you can start figuring out how the character is posed out. For this example, I'm not yet worried about the foot placement or any detailed mechanics of the character movement. I'll just do that on another pass. Right now, I'm just doing a layout pass where I know what the proportions of the character design looks like based on the staging inspired by my blob pass. Here's another example. This character is walking down the stairs at the same time singing to music with lip sync dialogue and acting and camera moves. So there's a lot of different things happening. So before I did an abstract blob like I did with the guy whipping towards the camera, I actually did a pose-to-pose layout pass. I looked at my thumbnail pass and I redrew some of those poses as keyframes. But I know these keyframes won't be in the final animation. They're just there for reference and placeholder of all the acting beats that I want to hit within the animation. So I'm not trying to think about how these drawings will connect. They're kind of just like storyboards within my animation. They're just there for the story element. Then after having done that, then I would do an abstract pass on top of it. So all I did was animated a blob for the head and a blob for the body. And I was just trying to figure out where the ups and downs are, how the character would move based on the music. I'm just animating the staging of the character before I even commit to the design and the proportions of the character. Then I actually added the arm gestures because the arm and the hand played a vital role in the animated performance, especially at the bit where she summons the guitar and starts playing it. I managed to find the timing of the beats per frame and just put that there as placeholder. So the only difference between this example and the previous example is that in the first example, I did the blob pass first and then did a layout pass using the blob pass as inspiration. But then in this example, I did a layout pass first with descriptive poses of the character and then did a blob pass. You can do it either or. But the reason why I did the second pass this way was because I already had very specific acting choices for the character at very specific times within the animation. And my abstract or blob pass is just there for my guide when I do the rough first pass of animation. I showed some of my friends and coworkers my abstract pass, and they chimed in with some ideas in another approach in how I could approach the abstract pass, where I could already define the head, the torso, the pelvis, and maybe the legs, so that at least I have something that's more closer to proportion of the character design. So if you feel that this blob pass is way too loose, too crude, too minimal, and maybe too garbage, then you could try a pass where you could already define the head, the torso, and the legs, like my friend is suggesting. Now we're going to do our rough shorthand pass for the animation. And this is where I start a new layer where I start figuring out the mechanics, the movement, the arcs, basically already animating the mechanics of the character. But remember, I'm still animating crude, I'm still animating rough. It really depends how you want to go about it. So in the first example with the guy whipping towards the camera, I'm not using the blob anymore because I did a layout pass on top of the blob. I would then use my layout key pose pass as my reference when I do the rough animation pass, basically animating on top of it, trying to figure out the mechanics, where the foot placements are, which part of the character is leading the action, whether it's their head, whether it's their torso. In the second example with the vampire playing the guitar, I used my abstract pass as my placeholder when I did the shorthand pass, now drawing it with the character design. Now the thing is that because I thumbnailed a layout pass before, I sort of also used that as a reference to sort of figure out the key poses that I did want to keep in the animation. But with the assistance of my blob pass where there's ups and downs, there's rhythm, I would then utilize my actual rough animation pass where I start to figure out, okay, where the feet are planted, how the shoulders should look when she steps forward, things like that. The part where there's a representation in the blob pass where she's strumming the guitar, I try to clarify it more in this rough animation pass. Next, I would do a tie-down pass, and for those who don't know, a tie-down pass is the pass right after your shorthand pass or your rough animation pass. It's the step right before cleanup. It's basically solidifying your very rough animation into something more clarified, more detailed, and basically solid drawings. So the drawings can definitely still be sketchy. If you want to improve your solid drawing skills, I would highly recommend you force yourself to draw the basic construction of your characters, so breaking them down into simple primitives and forms like cubes, cylinders, and spheres, drawing cross lines, using things like measurements if you can. You're pretty much training yourself to look at things more constructively. And eventually you'll come to a point where you don't necessarily need to draw through your objects or your characters. You can just come up with unique shapes or have very decisive lines that fit much closer to the final cleanup. But if you just want to improve your solid drawing skills, I wouldn't worry about making clean drawings and just draw through solid shapes and primitives. You'll also notice me adding more in-betweens or more drawings than my shorthand pass or my earlier passes, because that's where I'm trying to clarify and be more specific with the actual motion of the character. So for example, for my earlier pass with the girl walking down the stairs, one step is just her moving down. But then in my tie-down pass, I would actually add more information with her head moving around as she takes that stride. So just small things like that. But I personally don't try to in-between every single drawing. I don't try to turn every drawings into 2s or 1s. I'll save that for cleanup later on. But I'll also put a small chart note reminding myself that this is a slowdown, this is an even in-between, or this will accelerate. Just notes to myself. Notice how I did these animation shots at least 4 times. The first stage is thumbnailing, the planning stage. It's not really in an animated format, it's just me brainstorming the drawings for my animation. Then there's the layout pass, or doing a pass that's similar to storyboarding. Like I showed in another example, the layout pass can also just be a single drawing with multiple poses of the same character throughout the staging of the scene. The layout pass or the layout drawings aren't final, they aren't going to be shown in the final animation, they're just there for reference and placeholder. Then after that is an abstract pass. I'm just animating feeling. I'm just animating this blob that basically represents the overall gesture of the character. I'm not trying to define the character yet. I'm just trying to capture the timing, the feeling, the weight, all that information first. Truth to be told, I only use the abstract pass if I have no idea in how to approach a scene when there's a lot of things happening. Camera moves, a character's doing some acting. So I use an abstract pass to feel out the animation first before I commit to the character. Speaking of character, then there's a rough shorthand pass where I draw very loose, very crudely, very gesturally, but I'm already trying to figure out the mechanics of my animation, where the feet are placed, how the hips move, acting. I do these drawings really fast just to capture the feeling. Then there's the tie-down animation pass. If I know the rough animation works, the timing is there, the mechanics work, the tie-down pass is pretty much just labor work, making the character be more on model, removing drawings that might be unnecessary or distracting, and I can spend as long as I want per drawing if I really want to nail down the specifics of that drawing, and whatever it takes to make the character more on model. In a way, it's quite a repetitive process. Like, why animate a single shot for at least multiple times? Well, because a lot of those passes are me setting up the groundwork of the animation before I commit to any more finished looking drawings. But with all that repetition and that critical planning and thinking, it does improve your own skills in animation. And later down the line, you might not have to do a thumbnail pass. You might not even have to do an abstract layout pass. You can just jump straight into rough animation, or some animators will jump straight into this rough tie-down animation that is a clean first pass. But in order to get to that level, take things slow. Focus on one step at a time and add more complex layers down the line. It's kind of like drilling for sports or for dancing. You're allowing your body to recognize each step one by one at a slow pace, so it becomes muscle memory. And then when you need to perform it fast, it's already ingrained. Also, each step isn't the same amount of work. If I'm really fast, the abstract pass can just take a few minutes. The shorthand pass can take me a few minutes to an hour or two. I try to be really loose and crude, and most of my energy and time is spent on things like tie-down. But that's a beautiful thing about just taking one step at a time, not committing to anything final, and just taking things slow. Things like cleanup and coloring, that's a whole other world to talk about. Now, if you follow me on social media, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, and recently, I guess TikTok, there's a reason why I share my process and different stages of my animation, from the beginning stage, from the rough animation stage until its final look. I want to show you guys that my first stages of animation, my drawings are really loose, they're quite ugly, and it's not drawings that I would put in a demo reel until I have a tie-down pass. Like, I just start with lollipop heads with really loose scribbly bodies, and then work my way with multiple passes, tying down the drawings, eventually cleaning it up and coloring it. I want to show you guys that it is doable, and with planning, patience, and taking things slow, you can get a desired look. Second, I also want to show you guys how I think, what my thought process is like, what I'm prioritizing first. Also, this is a process that I've been using for many years now, and I'm still using it to this day. The only difference is a bit of experience and challenge myself to approach drawing differently. But other than that, my process for animation has been relatively the same. Working hard and long can be quite beneficial, and one could say that looking at my process is a lot of just hard work. But the difference is that I'm also thinking about what's important rather than just grunting through the whole thing. And if you're actively thinking and prioritizing certain elements in your animation, there's no doubt that your efficiency will improve over time much quicker than someone who just mindlessly animates for 10 years just doing the same thing over and over again without thinking before they commit. Now, I get a lot of questions like, how do I learn animation? How do I improve my animation skills? Or something generic like that. But sometimes I do get messages where they give me a scenario where it's like, hey, I have a character dancing, but at the same time they're fighting and they're angry and they're moving all over the place with this tempo. How would I do it? And then I would try and think about it and break it down, because that's where the money is at, how someone solves a problem. And therefore you'll get more practical answers than some like abstract bullcrap like, if you just believe in yourself, you can do it. So maybe later down the line, I'll show you guys some animation that I did in the past or recently, and then talk about breaking them down and how I approached a scene like that. If you guys want to see more of that, just let me know down in the comments below. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Peace out. Bye. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.